Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. I actually enjoyed this one, so let's do it. Police officers or investigators, etc. What were some of your holy shit, this criminal is pretty smart story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A few years back, my elderly neighbor's home was robbed. Her husband had just passed away, and the obituary was in the paper with showing times and time the burial ceremony was to start. These lowlifes looked up her husband's address in the phone book and knew exactly what time their house would be unoccupied. They took absolutely everything of value from this lady on the day she was putting her husband in the ground, and they never caught them. Scumbag. Guy found out that when a gas station lost its satellite connection, it automatically accepted all credit cards and would presumably process them later. So, he climbed on the roof and covered the dish with foil to force it to lose connection, then made charges on a card that was canceled. My dad is an attorney and had two clients, one who had an old, huge Chevy Nova with a very well hidden switch under the dash. He would flip the switch and the brake lights off, then go in front of someone and hit the brakes, won several claims from insurance companies. The second one was flying into small international airports carrying normal checked bags. Flew in from Canada every time, small puddle jumpers. Turns out, what he was actually doing was smuggling immense amounts of cocaine. He refused to say a word to cops or in his own trial, just pled out, and went to jail. My dad gets a single check to pay for his service of sitting and doing the plea deal, about half of his normal yearly earnings. Turns out, the guy was smuggling for Pablo Escobar and would have been killed if he talked. Many, many years ago, probably 20-ish, my dad used to own this company, and one of his employees died in a car accident. In the next few days, my dad received the work logs and books and things that this guy would have kept with him. And that's when my dad realized this guy was doing offline transactions, what they had to do when a client needed something after hours. I'm not exactly sure how it worked. It was something to do with the physical receipt layout, but he would overcharge X amount for the item, get to work and input Y amount paid, and have the correct receipt and pocket the difference. He'd been doing this for years and years, and my dad didn't realize. Not exactly the smartest, but he was never caught. My dad decided not to say anything to the family or anything like that. Your dad's a good man. I could see some people reacting differently to something like that, but out of respect, good. A bank in my hometown was robbed by a group of individuals during a historic snowstorm. We got about 12 feet in 2 days, and early in the storm, the bank was still open. A couple of people just walked in masked with guns, robbed the place, and escaped on foot. Police response time was about 45 minutes at best, and by the time they arrived on scene, the tracks were gone. Long shot, but pure genius. In the 2000s, you could order a new credit card, not activate it, and then when you were on a long haul flight, you could upgrade via the card machine to first class once on board, and then pay for the premium service. And when the flight landed and got internet connection, none of the purchases would be successful, and you would already be out of the airport. I never understood how they couldn't find you afterwards with your passport and credit card details, but it was a big fraudulent scam that hit the newspapers multiple times. Maybe because apart from witness testimonies, there wasn't a sufficient paper trail to say that you were upgraded or had any of the expensive champagne or duty free. My best friend growing up is a detective and had a crazy story. A couple worked at a Walmart home office annex dedicated to the startup of the Walmart self checkout for level 1 techs. Store employees would work them to fix problems at the machines. A few months after they got fired, they started going to Walmart and scanning crazy amounts of stuff to self checkout and walk out without paying, with the receipt. What they did? They would put scotch tape on one of the scanners, so when the associate tried to scan their badge, it wouldn't work. The workers had to input their 4-digit ID into the computer to put up the assistance menu, and from there, they would cancel the item. These two knew how the system worked and would simply watch and see the code. When the associate would leave, they would get back into the menu and cancel the entire order. This would print a suspended transaction receipt, which looked the exact same as a normal receipt, except it says suspended transaction at the very bottom. They didn't get caught for over a year. A very clever criminal was stealing electricity for his nightclub in Liverpool. The power company knew something was happening because as soon as this guy took over, their usage was about a quarter of the previous owner. They finally sent an old guy out to check the meter for problems. He discovered that they'd fitted a pressure switch on the door, so that when it was open, the meter turned as normal. But as soon as you closed it, the meter would stop turning. 2 years they'd been investigating before he was caught out. I was an assistant manager at a little deli corner store for a few years, and one of the employees bragged that he was getting a bag of weed a week from the store for free. Not to me, but to other employees. I couldn't figure out how. The numbers always matched up. He was also really successful with one of our couponing programs. It took me a while to figure out that our POS system would take the coupon without the UPC being scanned. In other words, the coupons were essentially cash. He was cashing out about $80 a week in coupons. The kid was pretty smart. I only found out when I was doing the inventory and the books the same week. I saw that we sold a ton of ice cream and thought, geez, I'm going to have to restock the crap out of that. Then realized that it was fully stocked and put two and two together. My old boss was a major thief with two of his close friends in my small city. They all worked normal jobs at areas where they could talk to people, waiting tables, and things like that. Every year, when Christmas or another break like the holiday, they would case out frat and sorority houses, and while everyone was seeing family, they'd clean them out. Would go by storage units and look for things like cigarette butts around them, and assume people probably practice playing music and store instruments there, since clearly they're there often enough to hang around and smoke. One of them got pinched when he tried to sell an expensive guitar at a music shop, and it was the shop owner's stolen guitar. Thinking quickly, he said how he had bought the guitar from a guy named, let's say, Steve. Gave the cops all the info since he had been working with Steve at the restaurant waiting tables. Well, Steve actually just died about a week before in a car wreck, so no charges on anyone. They had ATVs, motorcycles, every video game console, TVs, instruments, etc. When they were finally busted selling a four-wheeler to a sheriff's daughter, the other detective who investigated Steve told him that was a pretty clever idea, sending them after a dead man. Then they all went to prison for about 4 years. I mean, most of these are just, in my opinion, degenerate folk, but some of them are pretty smart. But like most things, you have a comeuppance, and they went to jail, so don't steal, especially instruments, man. That's personal. Okay, not a police officer here, worked in a corporate hair salon. We had a class on loss prevention at one time, and the lady that came to talk about what constitutes as theft with employees. One story she told us was about another salon, located somewhere else, where the stylists themselves were stealing money right from the company. Out of 5 stylists, 4 of them were scamming the company. Instead of running credit card payments through the corporate credit card system on the POS, they would tell the clients the credit card system was down, and they would have to run the card through another credit card system. Each of the 4 stylists had a Square device that they each set up like their own business, so the charges went straight to their own bank accounts, and then the service would either be canceled or show up as a no-show. They finally got caught when a customer called corporate to complain about her service and was wanting a refund. The transaction was nowhere to be found. The sad thing was one of the stylists was the salon manager, who ended up going to prison for 3 years, plus having to pay restitution. I'm not sure what the other 3 got, but I'm sure they all lost their jobs. Just blows the mind the things people will come up with. I'm not a cop, but my friend who worked at Best Buy used to do a pretty clever scheme. It's kind of effed up, but we were in college and our moral code wasn't exactly honorable at the time. Usually during the holidays, there is a deal where if you buy a certain TV, you get a gift card, something like $10 to $20. This wasn't really heavily advertised, but a salesman would likely tell this to a customer to get them to buy a TV. Well, this, my friend, wouldn't tell the customer. He would just sell the TV and pocket the gift card. However, he knew that each gift card was scanned and tied to that customer's transaction, and him, since he sold the TV. So what he would do is wait until he had a few cards, and then get into a coworker's computer session and buy one large gift card using the smaller gift cards. Now he could use the larger card for whatever purchases he wants without it really being tracked back to him. Never got caught, and I was always impressed he could pull this off. Worked as a trainee in an electrical company in southern Sweden many years ago. The company noticed an unusual power loss between two nodes in their power grid, couldn't figure it out for years. Eventually, they got suspicious about a local farmer and could see that the loss of power correlated with him running his watering system. Turns out, he's buried a big coil of copper wire beneath the high voltage power line. By carefully crafting it, he was able to induce just enough power to drive his watering system. Not a cop, but my crackhead uncle ended up doing 15 years for a scam he had been getting away with for more than 10 years. My uncle owned a junkyard. He would buy a car, a really common one, and then he'd sell it for like $5,000. Then he'd go and steal it back with an extra key he had for himself from whoever he sold it to, and take it back to his junkyard and swap the VIN number parts out and take the titles from identical cars that should have been destroyed. He would occasionally switch out which make or model he was doing this with, but he eventually got lazy and greedy, switching out less and less. He sold the same car this way like 12 times, and eventually the cops were starting to figure it out because three different people who had their cars stolen said they'd only bought it a week ago, all from the same guy. And that guy would magically have an identical car, but with a different VIN number listed for sale. In order to catch him, they had undercover cops buy the car multiple times, multiple undercovers, and they took pictures of extremely small details to prove it was the exact same car. The effed up part was, my dad was a vice cop working chop shops at the time. He knew his brother was under investigation, and it put him in a really shitty spot. But in the end, he just let them take him, and it worked out. My uncle got off crack in prison, cleaned up his life, got married, and turned into a legit and legal car dealer. I am not a police officer, but knew a doctor who was kind of a scam artist. It was a bit odd because he was a brilliant doctor and made so many people's lives better that people were so grateful they were always throwing money at him. Anyway, he ran a motor vehicle accident rehabilitation clinic, and he paid police officers a referral fee for any accident victims that they sent his way. It was something like $500 Canadian, which sounds like a lot of cash, but each client was worth tens of thousands of dollars to the clinic. He also literally hired one of the guys who wrote the actual tax code for an accountant or lawyer, so he would get away with so much slimy stuff, but I'm sure the revenue agency knew who he hired, so they were like, yeah, that guy's untouchable. Don't waste your time. My father ran film developing business and photography studios back in the 80s and 90s. That industry didn't age well in the 21st century. He hired a young employee who was a brilliant salesman, and the business grew into school pictures and wedding bookings soared, as did military events and running the color lab for several local newspapers. This guy could sell anything, but was a horrible photographer and couldn't run a lab, so he stayed in the sales end of the business. He offered to have his tax guy to the business taxes as a steep discount, so they changed tax preparers. Immediately after the quarterly employment and business taxes went off, this guy flipped. He refused to sell, yelled at customers, didn't answer the phones, and opened film canisters, spoiling two weddings from the previous weekend, which had to be restaged and reshot. Any idea how much it cost to restage an entire wedding? Imagine buying two complete weddings and paying to rent all new tuxes, rent the same space, and pretend to do the same wedding all over to get photographs, including buying airfare for family across the country. We fired the guy and were immediately sued. He paid his accountant on the back end to refile taxes as a partnership, not a sole proprietorship, and then took claim to half the assets of the business. He walked out with $250,000 in photographic equipment and color lab machines, sold his assets for cash, and disappeared. We found out much later that the same man, his accountant, and his attorney pulled the same scam with a car stereo company, a construction company, a muffler shop, and a taco franchise over the next 10 years. Very methodical and long game scam. Get in, get your accountant to get the business, file as a partnership without them knowing, get fired, and sue. He did that again and again, moving cities but keeping his attorney and accountant paid on the back end. My license plates were swapped with a car of the same make and model that was stolen. They then used their stolen car with my plates on them in a police chase. Nearly got my husband arrested for it until I showed them my car at the train station with the stolen car's plates on them. Cops were surprised they were that clever. Still got caught in the end, though. Dude hit like 10 banks and many other stores, just wearing his pandemic mask and a hood always on for a rainy or stormy day. Walked in each place and handed them a note that said he would shoot and be certain to kill them if they didn't give him all the cash they had. Ballsy, but I mean, they still haven't caught him, so damn. Pretty smart way to do it, I guess. Probably didn't even have a gun. What's funny is, none of the banks even triggered the silent alarm, and most of the stores called like 5 minutes after he left. He must have been pretty intimidating. Not sure exactly what the note said. I'll tell on myself if you guys want a wow, that person kinda sucks type of story. When I was younger, 16 to 21, I worked at an Italian restaurant that paid me cash and kept out a portion for taxes. Barf. Anyways, I worked there for 5 years, and around year two, when I totaled the amount of money they kept that should have been paid, I felt cheated. Even though I was supposed to pay taxes, also, I had a vague idea on what taxes were, but not a great understanding. I knew enough to know they didn't pay taxes on their business, though. Being immigrants, they had a grant allowing them to not pay taxes the first 2 years they were open. I basically was mad they were scamming me, even though I was also scamming the government. I was young and just didn't know it was as big of a deal as it is, and in my mind, it felt like if anyone deserved to keep the money, it was me, not them. I was basically unemployed for 5 years because I was never on their books. Anyways, I started getting mad because there was only 3 servers, including me, and I did a lot around the store, ordering beer, food, writing the checks for the linens and other supplies, working 10 to 10 the 5 days I worked. I was severely underpaid. We used handwritten tickets and no POS system, so I started completely pocketing certain cash paid tickets. When I rang out the cash, I would put it to the side and pocket it after they left and throw away both receipts, the kitchen copy and mine. Also, when people paid card, I would have to manually enter the total amount paid, including tip at the end of the night, and then enter the amount paid for the meal, so they knew what the tip was. On bigger checks, I would change the total for the food and drinks by a few dollars under the actual cost, so I got a bigger tip. The owners were so negligent with their business, they never knew. I would like to say that I never once stole from an innocent person or patron, just the people that were scamming me. Looking back, I can't believe how much authority I had and how much they believed in me to not do the things that they were. I was so brazen and unafraid because I felt indignant toward them. Even on the day I rage quit, I wrote up a to-go ticket for a huge order, like 3 extra large pizzas, several of my favorite dishes and desserts, and when the owner went upstairs for his daily nap with a woman that was not his wife, I loaded up my car with cases of wine and all the food I had made for the make-believe to-go order. I didn't have to buy groceries for days. Even though they are scam artists in their own right, I do feel pretty bad about what I did and would never do it again. Not a cop, but a newspaper reporter covering ongoing scams involving crooked tow truck drivers and body shops. It's a scam so lucrative that tow truck drivers are burning rival trucks and gunning each other down to protect their turf. Body shops pay tow truck kickbacks to bring collision tows, which they'll use to bill insurance companies for unneeded or overblown repairs. Toronto area uses a first available system for accident tows, where the first tow trucks on scene get the tow, which could be worth hundreds. So, what they're doing is targeting high-end cars and hiring people to trigger collisions with stolen cars, all with an affiliated tow truck conveniently around the corner. Even cops are getting into it. I wrote about one Toronto cop currently under suspension who would not only tip off tow trucks about collisions, Toronto encrypts their police radio band, he would sell police radios to tow truck drivers and either report them as lost or have an underground radio tech on payroll to clone the radio. He also operated an online service that streamed Toronto police radio transmissions online for paying subscribers, owned several tow trucks that he leased out, and even owned a car rental business. The scam fell apart after police north of Toronto did a traffic stop on a tow truck and discovered a police radio. That radio had the same ID number as one currently in service in the same division the cop worked in, and The police radio shop determined the tow truck driver's radio was genuine, but the one in the police circulation was actually an illegal clone. I could totally see how a situation like this could and probably still does happen in other small or even big cities. It seems too easy, especially when, the demolition guys or the reconstruction repair shops, body shops, can just charge insane numbers for things that they probably have in stock or can get at a discount. Former crime reporter here. One of my first stories, large electronics wholesaler in upstate New York, large truck backs to the loading bay at the start of the day. This is when cell phones were not as ubiquitous as they are today. Five guys jump out, lock all the employees in the lunchroom, use the forklift on site, fill a semi with high-end electronics, drive away. Hundreds of thousands of dollars of merchandise stolen in less than half an hour. Employees eventually break out, call the cops. Truck is long gone. Never caught. Some of the electronics eventually turned up in New York City. Story 2. Homeowners in a luxury house in a good neighborhood. They're on vacation. Moving truck pulls in, legit markings. Guys in jumpsuits empty the entire home. Couture clothing, tens of thousands of jewelry, high-end appliances, the works. Apparently, this was a stolen truck and a team of smart, opportunistic thieves. No one questioned the theft because the truck was an actual moving truck.